question that each of you will have to ask yourself. What drew you to Clark County? Why, if you weren't born and raised here, did you decide to come here to live? If it was our scenic open space, our fields of corn and cattle, our well-managed development concentrated around existing infrastructure, our moderate taxes, and our commitment to community, well, you need to look forward and think about how we're going to keep it that way. Changes in planning and zoning inevitably bring about an increase in traffic, air and water pollution, need for more government services such as schools, police, firemen, administrative staffing, and higher taxes to pay for the increased demand. Currently, 25% of our open land in our county is protected from dense development due to landowners who have permanently preserved our open space resources by putting a conservation easement on their property. So what is a conservation easement? It is a legal document which limits future development and preserves the natural resources of a designated parcel of land. The terms outlined in this document are negotiated between the landowner and the easement holder. Once the terms are agreed on, the document is recorded by the landowner and becomes a permanent part of the deed to that parcel. It runs with the deed, which means that it remains as a legal restriction on the development of that property, even through transfer of ownership. Most easements include the number of subdivisions and number of houses that can be built on the property. The other party in this document is the easement holder, which is the entity which has agreed to monitor the property to assure that the current owner is adhering to the terms of the recorded easement document. The easement holder can be a government entity or a private land trust. In either case, it is the obligation of the holder to enforce the terms of the easement by legal means if necessary. In more personal terms, a conservation easement enables the property owners to ensure the protection of their land and its resources, no matter how the zoning changes in the future. When parcels are conserved, the agricultural, water recharge, air quality, carbon abatement, scenic, and other values are continued in perpetuity. What an easement is not. A recorded conservation easement does not give any public access to the property. The entity that holds the easement will request access to monitor the property for adherence to the easement terms, usually on an annual or biannual basis. A conservation does not alter the tax rates or assessments on any of the improvements or personal property existing on the eased parcel. The houses, outbuildings, and other structures such as pools, tennis courts, and so on are assessed and taxed at the full rate. The open land, however, is assessed at a lower value due to the permanent development restrictions in the easement. This lowered value is taxed at the going rate. The community benefits are as follows. Contrary to popular belief, more residential development does not increase tax revenue for the county. Studies done in Clark and elsewhere show that houses cost the county more money than they produce in tax revenues. The chief driver of this imbalance is the cost of community services. Schools account for more than 70% of the county budget, and studies show that an average of 1.8 children per household in the county. Other services such as police, fire, maintenance, and staffing of public buildings, streets, and other county infrastructure, such as water and sewer, make up the bulk of the other 30% of the county's expenses. Conserved open space actually is a major contributor to making up the deficit between the total of what houses pay in taxes and what the total expenses are for these community services. This is because undeveloped land requires very little county expense. So even though land in easement or agricultural use is taxed at a lower assessment, which is the value per acre, the net result is tax income for the county that requires little or no outlay. It is summed up in the saying that cows don't ride school buses. The last little known benefit of conservation easements for our county is state funding for our schools. Because the state funding is largely based on a formula of the wealth of the county based on assessed land values, the lower assessments assigned to the open land in easement keeps the land values lower. Thus, the county wealth quotient, in quotes, stays lower, which raises the amount of school funding from the state. So, in a nutshell, conservation easements permanently limit the development of a property, even through future transfers of ownership, protect the natural resources of that property and the county as a whole, maintains privacy, gives the easement donor multiple tax benefits, of which you will hear more presently, and benefits the entire community by helping to balance the budget and increases the state funding share for our schools. What's not to like? That's the end of my disquisition. If there are any questions, I'll be around later, or we can do it. We don't need to do it now, but if you have a question about any of this.
I had a question. You mentioned in your presentation that 25% of Clark County residents have their property in conservation easement. Did I hear that correct?
25% of the land in the county is in conservation easement, not 25% of the residents.
And does that include people who have property in forestry or agriculture land use, or
no?
It does not. That's separate.
It's in a permanent conservation easement with an entity that holds the easement.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Winky. Next, I'd like to call to the stage Brooke Middleton, who is a certified public accountant with Virginia Easement Exchange, and he's going to give us a bit of a rundown on the tax advantages to conservation easements.
Good evening. My name is Brooke Middleton. My wife and I own Woodley Farm. Woodley Farm is subject to a conservation easement with the Virginia Outdoors Foundation. Although we've donated several conservation easements in Virginia, this farm actually was subject to the conservation easement when we purchased it. The Orstrom family had placed it in easement, and we're very glad that they did. What does that mean for us? First of all, we know that the farm will always be protected. But as far as restrictions, what does it mean for us? We can still farm it. The neighbor takes the hay. Michelle and I have horses and we ride on the farm, and actually the Clark County Hunt has a horse race on the farm. Subject to the terms of the easement, we could still build additional houses, although we have no plan to do that. Subject to the terms of the easement, we could build additional agricultural structures. And subject to the terms of the easement, it's a large parcel, it's 383 acres. We could also divide the farm, but we have no intention of doing that. But that's an example of an easement. And Winky has given you a lot of information, and some of what I have may cover that, so I'm going to move right along. Robin, can we go to the next slide? A conservation easement is a permanent restriction placed on real estate by a property owner through a deed of easement limiting the use and development rights associated with the property. Next one. The Virginia program allows for a donation of qualified conservation contribution, which is a contribution of qualified real property to a qualified organization exclusively for conservation purposes. The easement must be exclusive and it must be permanent. Permanent means it's forever. Permanent means you can't change it. Conservation purposes are many. Most of the easements that we see in Clark County and most of the ones we see in Virginia are for open space. The restrictions contained in the easement result in a loss of value, and that's what gives you a tax deduction, and that's what gives you the Virginia Land Preservation Credit. The reduction in value must be determined by an appraiser, and you can't just get any appraiser. You need an expert appraiser that works in this area. I actually have a case right now where someone did a donation and they used an appraiser just off the street, and the state's not accepting it. But the good news is Norman, who's going to come a little later, was able to rectify that, but it has to be a qualified appraiser, and they must follow the standards, which are very detailed, but they're certainly followable. In return for donating the easement, you get a federal tax deduction, a state tax deduction, a transferable Virginia tax credit, which you may use or sell. That means you can get cash. And then you also get reduced state property taxes. So, for example, Woodley, although we have someone take the hay, I never have to file land use. The farm is taxed at agricultural rates. The federal tax deduction is under Code Section 170. If you buy a property, you're limited to your basis in the easement for the first year. Most people wait a year. The donation may be used against 50% of your adjusted gross income for up to 16 years. That's 1 year plus 15. If you happen to be a farmer, it's even better. You can get 100% of your income for up to 16 years. You also get a state income tax deduction just like any other charitable donation. You also receive a transferable state income tax credit. And that's kind of interesting to me. There were easements done in Virginia before the credits became transferable in 2002. But once you could say to someone, hey, you're going to get all this cash for doing it, the program has been wildly successful. And that, in my opinion, is why the program has really grown over the years, is because now you can get this cash. It's not a secret that farmers don't usually pay income tax. And a lot of the people that own land are retired and they bought the land years ago, and they're in their golden years, they don't usually pay tax. But the tax credit is 40% of the amount of the donation. It can be used for up to 10 years. And if you're lucky enough to have a high income, you can use 20,000 of it yourself or 40,000 if you're married. It doesn't matter which spouse has the income. And in addition, the cap is limited to 75 million a year. So right now we're furiously rushing around in my office to get a few easements done, and it's always a question of whether or not we'll make it under the cap. But if we don't get them done this year, they'll roll over to next year. But there's a total maximum of 75 million of the transferable credit every year. There is no federal income tax on the issuance of the credit. So you don't have to pay tax on the credit they give you. You cannot use the use of the tax credit for a tax deduction, and the credit is not refundable. The credit does reduce your federal income tax deduction, but what we see in practice is most people can't use the federal income tax deduction. So actually, it doesn't hurt them. Virginia does not tax the sale of the credits. it is unclear if the sale of the credit is subject to federal income tax, but there is a reasonable argument that because the taxpayer's deduction is limited, that they now have basis in the tax credit, and in fact, they may have a loss on the credit if they sell it at a discount, which is what the case of everyone doing. This is an example. It doesn't relate to any property, and it's a made-up example. If you decide to pursue this, you should consult with an appraiser, but we'll go through this example. Mr. and Mrs. Smith own a 100-acre farm in Clark County. It's just a raw piece of land, but if it had a house on it, it would be fine. It would just make it a little more complicated. The farm currently has 4 dwelling unit rights. That's how you divide land or build structures in Clark County. The Smiths only need 1, and they decide they're going to protect the farm. So they donate a permanent conservation easement, and they retire 3 of the DURs. So they go from being able to build 4 houses to just the 1 retirement home. The appraiser values the donation at $250,000 for the DURs. DURs, we see them valued somewhere in between 50 and 100,000, and Norman will talk a little bit about that. In this hypothetical example, the taxpayer would receive a federal tax deduction of $250,000, and that tax deduction is reduced by the value of the land preservation credit, 40%, and that leaves them with a federal tax deduction of $150,000. The $150,000 federal tax deduction can be used against 50% of their adjusted gross income for up to 16 years. So in this assumption, we're saying that their tax rate is 34%, and that would mean that they would save $50,000 in income tax over the period. The Virginia land preservation credit in this example would be $100,000. It's better if they can use it, but most people end up selling it. And if they sold it, they would net about $80,000 from the sale of the credits. So the summary of the financial benefits in our example is the federal tax deduction saves them $50,000. The sale of the tax credits, assuming it's not taxable, would generate $80,000, and the total financial benefits would be $130,000 for donating the easement. Are there any questions? Have I confused you? Put you to sleep, both?
Can we get your hand out?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
They're in the table in the back.
Okay.
Jeff.
You mentioned that most people don't take the federal tax deduction, but why is that?
No, they can't use it.
They can't use it because their
The reality is unless you're at a cocktail party, most people don't have a huge high income. So some people can, but our experience is that most people aren't able to use the deduction over 16 years, but there are quite a few people that can. Yes, sir.
Early on, you said when you were talking about the overdue, that the easement must be exclusive and in perpetuity. What does it mean to be exclusive?
It's in favor of them and not anyone else. So when you pick your donee, and the best donee in Clark County would be Clark County, it's to them. It has to be in their favor. It can't benefit someone else. Rarely, but not a lot, we see hold easements, but it would have to be something exceptional or unusual. And frankly, I think it just complicates the process. Yes, sir.
When a DUR is sold back to the county, does that DUR go away, or is that DUR still in the county books that possibly can be used or reinstated in the future?
I believe they are retired, which means they can't.
They're poof. They're gone.
They're poof.
And I forget, what's the cash value of selling the DUR back?
Well, that was going to be my next thing, and maybe I'm happy to put her on the spot. Allison, do you want to talk a little bit about Clark County's unique PDR program and how that works?
Oh, sure. So the county offers a couple of purchase options in addition to donating an easement, and the donation would come if you, as Brooke said, had the ability to use your tax credits. So one of the options is the DUR purchase, and that's where the county will pay up to $40,000 per DUR retired, but that's dependent on what we call a property resource score, which is basically an objective way to evaluate the conservation values of the properties, things like do you have historic resources or a stream or steep slopes, and a number of things that go into that. And then the owner's adjusted gross income for 3 years, 3-year average. So we factor in the owner income for a DUR purchase because the county has very limited local funds to pay for conservation easements. And if you pay taxes, we don't want to pay you county money. So we have a sliding scale. If you make under $55,000 over 3 years, we'll pay you 100% of whatever the offer is, up to $40,000 per DUR. If you make over, I think it's 205,000 over a 3-year average, we only pay 4%. So wherever you fall into that would be the cash amount you could get out of it. Then there's a grant purchase option, which briefly, if the property qualifies for various grants that are out there, we can pay up to 75% of the appraised value of the easement. So those are our two purchase options. Typically, I guess, as Brooke had said in his presentation, is what 50,000 to 100,000 is a generally appraised value for a.
That's what we've seen them appraised at. It's always better to do the purchase of development rights if your income qualifies, and if you start with the Clark County Easement Authority, they will educate you on that quickly from the start. But it's always better to get the cash and reduce your charitable donation, if that makes any sense.
And that's treated as ordinary income, instead of what you get from the county, right?
You know, the joke is an accountant, what's the answer to any question? It depends. But I think there is a reasonable argument that you can take your basis, meaning what you paid for your land, against the sale of the DUR. So that means no tax. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I like your style. Will you be my accountant beyond just?
I am happy to say that I don't do my own taxes.
Thank you.
Norman?
You'll do a better job than I do.
Well, I'm not sure about that. Our next speaker is Norman Myers. He's with Myers Appraisal Service. I believe you're out of Leesburg, is that correct? And he's going to talk about how will an appraisal of my property work. Wasn't even working well enough here, was it?
That was good, Randy. I'm not sure I would have gotten it right. I guess my part of the process starts, Brooke will usually send people to me and say, ask the appraiser, let's get an idea before we get into the complex process of actually doing the appraisal. We'd like to know if what's the general idea of what it's worth. You know, what are the issues? What's the zoning? How many DURs do you have? Let's frame it and see if it's going to pay for the cost of going through the process. So we do what we call a restricted report, and that's basically an estimate as of that particular date. And I'll tell you honestly, most of it starts with after that. If you talk to me in Loudoun County, it's one thing, in Clark County, it's another. The big thing I'm going to ask you is, how many DURs do you have? And then after that, we start looking at how developable those lots are. If you were to take those DURs and translate them into lots, how much are those lots worth? Can you put them up along the road theoretically? We've had problems where somebody was on an easement, and Allison will remember this probably. But the roadway wasn't wide enough, the right of way wasn't wide enough to get back there to allow more than whatever 3 or 4 DURs. So that didn't turn out as well. They did it anyway, it was fine. But there's others where you could put up where you've got road frontage. and you don't have to do a whole lot of infrastructure to put in those hypothetical 3-acre lots. Is that what the limit is, 3 acres?
Yeah.
Pretty much,
Yeah.
yeah. So, so you just put them along the road, hypothetically. I know we always have to say that because people say, no, I don't want to do them. I don't want to see lots. Now we're talking hypothetical lots, not real ones. So those are inexpensive to sell, to develop. So that's where we might get closer to the $100,000 range for a DUR. I gave Brooke those figures just looking back at my records. We were from 50 to 100,000, maybe 40 a few years ago to 100,000 per DUR. So that could get you in the ballpark. The restrictor report also uncovers any unknowns. And we like to check with the county office itself. The tax records are not always exactly accurate. So we go right to, and you can do the same thing, go right to your zoning department and ask them how many DURs you have. And we like to get a letter to that effect. So that's what gives us the evidence in the appraisal, to show that you're losing something. The IRS likes to see, or the state likes to see, that you're actually giving up something. Okay, so that's how the process works. And if it looks good so far, we can go ahead and start engaging the land trust, or does the document look like that Allison would give you? Is that satisfactory? How many DURs do you really want to give up? Do you want to save 1 or 2 for your kids and just retire 8 of them, or whatever you have? And then what else do we do? Then you need a release on the land. Sometimes that's complicated because you've got to get your lender to sign off. When you give up an easement, the lender has to agree to release that land for that. So sometimes we end up getting double appraisals. What is it worth before, after the easement, and will that still satisfy the terms of the note? What else? And that's about it. And then we go from there. Anyway, it's a lot simpler here in a lot of ways than it is in Clark. Maybe you don't even, than in Loudon. Maybe you don't even need to get a restrictor report if you can figure out your DURs and just use some common sense, or talk to Allison. You might be able just to kind of figure it out yourself, and we can go from there. But you do need a qualified appraisal by a qualified appraiser, which I learned this about 15 years ago with trouble when the IRS, the state of Virginia decided to hire a hatchet guy to go back and look at all these appraisals to make sure they were legitimate. And he did that for a while, so I did some forensic work, and actually we really pretty much won most of the cases. So they ended up getting rid of him. Now they just have a nice staff, and they're always easy to work through. If they have a problem, they call me, we talk. We're not adversarial, we work it out. I've never been reversed on a decision. The IRS has challenged in one case. I've had over 50 clients. We've done probably about close to 15,000 acres in easements. So other than somebody that has some tax problems anyway, they will pick on it. So try to keep your tax record clean so you won't be a red flag to, let's open this up, and they're going to look at the conservation easement and say, that's easy pickings. But they usually don't win on that either. So they might give up future benefits, future tax credits, or something like that. But usually it works out pretty well. So anyway, are there any questions?
I have one just to ask you to elaborate a little bit. The value of the easement can be beefed up, if you will, by further restrictions such as buffer strips and different restrictions on the land, no subdivisions, that kind of thing, and that affects the appraisal value. Is that correct or not?
Yeah, yes, and sort of no. It's really easy to show, or easy for me to show, the loss in value by not selling lots. For example, let's say your property is worth $10,000 an acre, and let's say a 3-acre lot is worth $200,000, for example, 150, whatever. And your value is easy to measure that difference between the $10,000 an acre land before the easement, as if you didn't have an easement, versus the 3-acre lot, which might be worth $30,000 or $50,000 an acre. That's the way to look at it. So it's very easy to measure and to show the example, taking into consideration the development cost. But the problem with the buffers and the other things that you give up, they're fairly uniform. What we see in appraisals, whether they're here in Clark or in Loudon or Dominion Conservancy, the various ones, they're fairly similar. No further subdivision other than such and such, what's permitted, no building over so many square feet without special permission, impermeable surfaces, that's fairly uniform. So I guess you could give up some things, but it's harder to detect and harder to quantify. I like to be real exact with what I'm doing. So we can take those things other than subdivision into account, but it's not as easy and not as objective.
Does the landowner pay the appraisal up front before this starts?
No, we do. We ask for on the restricted report, we do ask for that. Yeah, it's typical for the appraisal. Yeah, we get, depending $1,000 to $1,500 usually for a restricted report, depending on the complexity and all. At that point, you decide. Loudoun County has a program where they help you if you're under certain income levels. I don't know if Clark has that or not.
Yeah, we do.
You do? Okay, there you go. And the answer is if you're poor enough, you don't have to pay. The full appraisal usually starts about $5,000. It can go up.
Can you speak to the length of time that the appraisal's good? Like, isn't there like a 6-month window, or there's a certain amount of time where you have to redo it or update it if you don't get the?
I think that's kind of a matter of interpretation. What the rule says, as far as I can see, is the appraisal date has to be within 6 months of the easement.
Okay.
But it doesn't say you can't turn it in 12 months as long as we can call whatever date we want to as the effective date. And we always call the effective date the date of the appraisal. I mean, the date of the easement.
Okay.
Whatever that's stamped, that's the date. Now, if that appraisal doesn't get in for 12 months for some odd reason, that's not the case, but, we usually can turn it in 3 or 4 weeks after recording of the easement. So yes and no, depending on how you interpret it. I'll give you the accountant's answer.
But if you have the appraisal done in January and the easement doesn't get recorded until December, is it still a viable?
The way the process works is you hire the appraiser, you get an estimate of value, and then you record the easement, and then he does the appraisal. So that problem doesn't occur. Now, if you got the estimate in 2020, and now you're saying, I want to do it now, Norman, well, you'd be wise to getting to refresh it.
Probably, yeah.
Because it may have gone up.
Yeah.
If we have a recession, they may go down, but typically that's not an issue. You would get an estimate from the appraiser, and then when you record, you'll get the final appraisal. And typically they creep up a little. Norman tends to be conservative. Would you say that?
Yeah, I always give a conservative answer in the beginning for the restricted report because I don't want people to be.
Come up, not 50%, but maybe 10 or 20 in some cases.
I don't want anybody to be disappointed and they go and record the easement based on I gave them a figure of $1 million, but it turns out it's $500,000. You're not going to be very happy with me. So I give you a very, now I can't control market conditions, that can change. Inflation, mortgage prices, we don't know. So these are very interesting times right now. But yes, the appraisals, each one is given as of the date. And one reason we don't want to do a full appraisal, and say, this is the value, this is just the value as of the date of that restricted report. And if you do the appraisal and record it, and it's not unusual for it to be 6 months or a year later even, and depending on going through the negotiation process for the easement documents and the release from the lenders, and some of them go fast, but Anyway, so that's what happens. So we don't start the appraisal until we actually get that recorded deed in our hands, because people will say, oh, it's coming, it's coming next week, can't you get started? No, it doesn't come for a month, it doesn't come for 2 months. In the meantime, we have new comparable sales, and I gotta change everything. So we don't even start until we get the recorded easement on the final. And you can always talk to me and say what's happening, and I'll say, do it now, or things are looking like they're getting better, maybe wait a little bit, or you missed your opportunity, turn the clock back and record it, so we talk, it's not just all formal stuff.
I would say the biggest holdup, Norman disagreed, the biggest holdup on conservation easements is lenders. If you're with a Bank of Clark or Farm Credit, you're probably gonna be okay and you have to go through the process. If you're with BB&T Bank or Chase Manhattan Bank, or God forbid you have a conforming mortgage, it may be difficult or impossible to get the lender to sign off. So one of the first steps is to talk to the lender and say, this is what we're doing. Are you on board? What is your process? Because you don't want to spend 6 months and money and aggravation and find out that the lender won't do it. You agree, Norman?
I totally agree with that. That holds up more appraisal, more easement recordings than anything we know.
Is the main upfront cost to the landowner going through this process essentially just paying for the easement? I mean, the appraisals? Or are there other costs associated with restricted reporting?
So I always joke everyone has their hands out in the process, but at some point you will need an attorney, unless you're an attorney and very experienced. That will be a cost. If you go with Clark County, there is no fee. Is that correct?
We don't charge any application fee. It's somewhat income dependent, as we discussed earlier. We typically require a 60-year title search, so that's an expense.
That would be $300.
Yeah.
That's not. So lawyers, big costs can be, appraiser, not a big cost. What else?
We don't usually require surveys unless it's some unusual circumstance.
So appraiser, not a huge fee.
Sometimes it costs analysts, like Mike.
Oh yeah, not so much in Clark, but if you had land that was highly developable, an example was we did a parcel in the town of Berryville that was extremely valuable and had high density. And in that case, it was worth the individual hiring a consultant to actually show how the 100 lots or whatever could be arranged on the property. But we usually don't see that with Clark County and just DURs.
If you don't go with the county, if you went with PEC, for example, or another land trust, oftentimes there's a stewardship fee as well. I don't think you guys have that.
We don't, but
Yeah,
that's a
benefit
good point.
going through the county.
Yeah, in other private land trusts, you could you can spend $100,000 to do an easement. I don't advise that, but you can pay a land trust 25. You can get an expensive lawyer, and you can quickly go up fast. But in Clark, I don't want to say, but I would say 5,000 would be a high side. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 5,000 would be a high side.
And the appraisal would be, and that's typically covered by the county, but yeah, high side.
And what do you do here about follow-up? Like, I know when a land trust takes it, they need money they need the money in order to do the enforcement or the due diligence to, based on the baseline study.
Yeah, the county is eligible for, I guess it's basically a state tax credit, a stewardship fee that's paid from the Department of Conservation and Recreation. My limited understanding is it's based on the number of people that use tax credits in the county. So they send us a check every year. And we've established a fairly good account that's a war chest, so that if we ever have to defend the easements legally, if there's a violation, then we can use it for that. So we don't collect stewardship fees. The other thing that we use it for is we are required to monitor the easements every year to make sure that, as we've talked about, the terms are upheld from the original intent. And so we hire college students as interns, and we pay them out of that same stewardship account.
Okay.
We also have, can I, this probably would be a good idea. Sorry about my raspy throat, can't do anything about it. But we also have, which we instituted not too long ago, probably 10 years ago, a system whereby if you do an easement, you can also put into the easement, or I don't know how we record it, that if the property is sold, a certain percentage of the sale of that property goes to the county, to this fund that we have to help with our easement, when
Expenses.
yeah, expenses. So it's a wonderful thing. I sort of found out about it. They do it in Jackson Hole or somewhere. So and it is legal in Virginia, so we instituted it.
Yeah, we do it as a voluntary thing.
It's a voluntary thing, but we do have people who have signed up, and we have benefited from it in certain cases. And it's a nice way to pay forward on your county preservation.
Yep.
Do you charge for the baseline study? That's something we do.
No,
No.
we don't
okay.
charge for anything.
This is.
We
All right.
want you to put your land in easement.
Okay, good.
If we haven't made that clear, the folks at the Easement Authority are great, and we are very lucky to have them. And as someone who practices throughout the county, this whole state, no other county or area has this. So we're very blessed to have the staff and the people at the Easement Authority.
Brooke and I are trying to get them to go over to Loudoun County too and kidnap them. So no, we won't do that.
Allison's tired of my joke, but I keep telling it. I want to clone her and put her in every county in the state.
Too kind.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Who's next?
Oh, want to take a 5-minute break?
Everybody want a break?
Or we can keep going. It's up to you.
Want some more dessert?
The next section is our two landowners who graciously agreed to be panelists to help you understand other people's experience with going through the easement process. One participated in the DUR purchase and the other was a donation. So you guys want to come up, and we got the hot seats for you. So I'm going to do the introductions, and then Jeff has some prepared questions for them, and then we'll open it up for any of you that would like to ask the landowners questions about how they experience the process, or pitfalls, or any other things that maybe they experienced. Thank you again. So on the far right is Jeff Murphy. We have pictures of or maps of the property that Jeff Figge provided, and Jeff is on the left there. So he purchased 2 parcels consisting of approximately 122 acres in August of 2021. The property consists of 2 parcels, one of 121 acres with an existing house and 5 remaining DURs. The second parcel was only 1.8 acres with 1 DUR. The property is located on Long Marsh Road, approximately 4 miles south of Old Charlestown Road, and the large parcel has an existing house built in 1984. The smaller parcel is vacant. The current land use is for hay and pasture, and Mr. Murphy is operating a horse training facility on the property. As part of the DUR purchase, Mr. Murphy retired 4 of the remaining 6 DURs and was permitted to expand the 1.8 acres to 3 acres and subdivide an additional 3-acre lot. He applied for the DUR purchase on the property in February 16th, 2022, and the easement was recorded in May of 2022. That's Mr. Murphy's story. And Mr. Pratt, Lowell Pratt. Mr. Pratt purchased 4 parcels, shown on the right side here, consisting of 180 acres in 2020. The properties are located on Mount Carmel Road, just north of Palms Neck. He purchased the property. There were 4 parcels totaling 180 acres and with 11 DURs. Mr. Pratt ultimately merged the 4 parcels into 1 and retired 9 of the 11 DURs with no subdivision potential. In addition, he placed a building envelope on the property that serves to limit the location of the structures. He applied to donate an easement on the property in December of 2020, and the easement was recorded in November of 2021. Thank you, gentlemen. And Jeff will take over.
All right, I think I'll ask the same question, and then I'll give each of you a chance to answer that same question. So the first question is, how did you find out about conservation easements and what made them attractive to you? And we'll start with Jeff.
Okay, I came over to the United States from Ireland in 2002, and I came to work for Winky's son-in-law, Jimmy Day, and her, he trained race horses, so I came over, and I lived on the farm with the horses in Claytonville, outside Millwood, and the farm was in conservation easement, and I'd never seen it before, and when I was here the first few years, I'd go back home every couple of years, and I was really disappointed to see the amount of houses on the roads where I used to ride my horses or whatever. Now there's a house there, and that's gone. That field is gone forever. This is happening everywhere, and we had ghost estates. And then after the crash in 07, and some of those houses are still sitting empty in Ireland, and it's just really sad to see such a beautiful part of the world have derelict houses, where, it's just, we definitely don't want to have that happen here. Well, it probably won't happen here, it's a different kind of country, but there's a lot more money, it shouldn't happen that. But anyway, I've been lucky to make a living riding horses around the countryside, and if there's houses there, you can't do that. So I grew up on a dairy farm as well, and so I've just been basically a farmer my whole life, and you don't need that many houses out in the country. I love the way we have them in Berryville or in Berryville or in Boyce, they're in Millwood. I think we're a good example for the rest of the counties around us, I think. So good job.
All right.
Yeah, I wish I had the cool accent too, but.
No, it's great.
Yeah, so I run an investment firm, and years ago, 5 years ago maybe, I was contacted. I get everybody's trying to sell me whatever their product is, and I've got really great screeners. It's hard to get through to me, but I had this enterprising guy that got through to me that said, hey, I've got this syndicated conservation easement proposition where you buy $100,000 increments. In a year's time, we'll give you about $100,000 worth of tax credits. And then in about another year's time, we'll give you $100,000, the original money in, back. So 100% return in 2 years. And, one of those too good to be true, quick click, done. And then 6 months later, I get the exact same call from a different outfit, same exact proposition. So that second one motivated me to start digging into it. Spoke with my accountant, did a lot of Googling, and it's a very legitimate program in the state of Virginia. Not so much the syndicated. A lot of those guys are probably in jail now, but the people that are doing it the legitimate way, it's a viable program. So I just started looking around, and I found a really cool 77-acre property in Loudoun County, and took a chance. And it was one of those things where I figured there's going to be some super significant, unpleasant, something along the process. So I kind of held my breath the whole way through, and it actually, I never found that, that big problem with the process, and it all turned out to be just exactly as expected. So, finished that project and decided to try it again, and found this property, this 180 acres here in Clark, which is a cooler property, by the way, than the other one. And so, decided to give it a go. And this time I did it with more confidence. I kind of knew what the process was, and it kind of played out. And I shared with everybody as a handout kind of the math that was my math on this particular project. And I could go through that if you want, but it's a pretty straightforward process in a very complex way, like the first time you do it. But after you've done it once, it's, exactly what to expect.
All right, well, you described a little bit of the next question, but you might have more to add. What was the first steps you took in the process when you decided to finally, actually do the easement?
I think I called David Weiss because I know David from years ago, and he told me to call Alison, and then Alison did everything for me, and I'm here now. So, like, I can't tell you how easy Alison made it, and Jeff as well.
You are very agreeable.
Absolutely. Well, look, there's no catch. Like, it's I sold my DURs because I needed some money for infrastructure on the farm. I'm building barns. I have labor. I have materials. I needed something to get my business up off the ground, and this was a great win-win for me. I always said it's my goal, as a jockey, was one day to have my own farm, and I put it in easement and preserve it there for everybody. I have 2 kids. I want them to have the same thing. I want them to, if they're going to go out, I want them to, conserve nature, because we only have one shot. The world is crying out for help at the moment. So, it's, for me, that's the start. If we're going to do something, you need to have land. I'm going to plant as many trees as we can, and, lead our next generation to learn the ways of, looking after what we have now. That's really one of my main goals for, buying a farm. Obviously, I have to make a living, and it's a great way to raise kids and the whole lot. So where are you getting off? I don't think there was.
No, I had a question about that later.
Yeah.
We'll go into that. And how about you, Lowell?
Yeah, so in my case, I didn't have Allison because I started in Loudoun County, which made it harder. But I had a pretty good agent that kind of specialized in rural properties. I had bought a place in Lovettsville with her years earlier. And so she knew the right real estate attorney to connect me to Norman and to Brooke later on to kind of get the whole process started. So you need sort of a guide to put you in touch with the right people to kind of take you through the process. But then it was pretty straightforward after that.
Were there any surprises?
No, not really. I mean, other than that fear of that surprise. Like surprise was a big part of that first experience, but it never materialized.
Not surprised.
No surprises. If you had advice, we say, you have any advice, 1 or 3 things that you learned? Any advice for any of the people out here that might do an easement in the future?
Just do your due diligence and see if it's going to work for you. Just work doing. Like as I said, for me, there was all thumbs up. Like there was no negatives for me, and I needed to do it anyway. So, and it was something I always wanted to do. So, it was very simple, straightforward for me. I can't really even tell you about anything. There was no hiccup I forgot to sign something one time.
God. We know where you live.
So yeah, something like that.
So I think that 50 to 100,000 estimate of what a sacrifice DUR will translate to is pretty close. I did the math real quick. I didn't think about that beforehand, but on this project, it was 73,000 was my number for the per DUR kind of thing. But to get confidence that that's going to be your case, because there's a lot of you have to actually have legitimately developable property. And you could have bad soil, you could have, bad road access. There's lots of things that could kind of blow that up. So that it's extra cost, but that restrictive appraisal that Norman does at the beginning of the process gives you the confidence that, okay, this actually is a viable project. So it's I don't like spending money that I don't have to spend, but that's money well spent in terms of knowing ahead of time that this is going to work.
It's good advice. So, do you have any other thoughts to share? I mean, I have one additional question that that's not on the sheet that you saw, but do you have any conservation projects that you got in the works that you're planning on doing on your farm this coming year? Putting the conservation in the conservation easement, you might say.
Well, I planted 60 trees yesterday on the farm, so that was a good day in the rain. but I couldn't train horses, it was too wet, so that was good. But no, like stuff like that, yeah, I want to, for me, yeah, keep planting as much as we can, get the kids picking acorns and all that kind of stuff. Just, yeah, every day is a nature day, you know, so.
Yeah.
I have a pond I need to do a bit of repair work on, it's got a leak, and we had about 15 geese on it yesterday, so our swarm's going over, we have ducks, it's good, and trees are coming up because the farm was just beef cows, so nothing got to come up. We'll have like so much honeysuckle next spring, it's going to be amazing. Loads of new saplings coming up from that, you know, didn't get grazed, you know, so yeah, I'm really looking forward to it, you know. And
Did you get that windmill running? Is that
Yeah,
going to be able to pump
windmills.
that water into your?
yeah, I have a
pond?
windmill and I have a solar panel as well, so we're gonna try and go more solar.
You
We
see, you
have
don't
a
have to
lot
climb that windmill. I know you like to do it, but it's looks a little scary to
I'm
me.
not allowed anymore. So,
How about you?
Yeah, so in my case, I've got to learn a new trick. Most of this property is old hardwood forest, and you know, kind of not the clear cut forestry, but I've got to actually utilize that resource, and it would actually probably make my, you know, I'm a hunter, so the habitat for the animals is something that I care about. So I haven't done it yet, but I need to figure out how to get the right kind of logging crew in there to do kind of the selective harvests that are allowed under the terms of the easement. And I think that's the main, I'll call it economic use, other than, you know, kind of with my, I'll call it profits from the tax harvest from this whole thing. I kind of converted all that into a cabin that I just finished building on the property. So there's going to be a recreational use, and then that'll be the primary sort of ag use of the property.
All right. All right, are there any questions that anybody out here has for the panelists? Yes.
What does your outreach program look like? I mean, how do you contact owners of property or people who are buying new property to tell them of your program? How do you contact these people?
One of the big ways is we send out a flyer about the Conservation Easement Authority with the tax bills that go out in the county. So that's one way. And then we have events like this, and we advertise these on social media, you know, that kind of way. But I think that the tax bill flyer has probably been one of the best ways. And then we have word of mouth. I've only been here for a year, and it seems that everybody in this county gets to know each other. And so a lot of people have heard of the program, and hopefully they reach out and call the government office and just find out more. But how did you hear about it, for example?
I think I called you, asked about building a bridge across the.
All right.
That's right.
I like the flyer. I always think
Okay.
it's interesting when you get it in the mail to see, you know.
Right.
And my neighbours, coons, they have a dairy farm. They would put some in conservation right before I did.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yes.
Sounds like the Clark County program is like, you know, top of the scale for how these things should work. But you've had experience both in Loudon and in Clark. I'm curious what, you know, how is Loudon different? We actually have property in Loudon.
Yeah, so Loudon's $15,000 more expensive. And it's because when you put your property into an easement with a land trust that's not, you know, county sponsored, state sponsored, it actually sounds like in Clark's count, you know, you have to give them the resources to enforce your easement forever, right? And so in the 77 acre case, that was $15,000. So that was an expense you know, there was no other way to do that there, which I didn't have here. The other thing is there's no Allison that I found in Loudon. So, you know, you have to sort of figure things out more on your own. And that's why you want to like connect with Brooke and with Norman to be sort of somebody that you could go to. And they were both great in terms of question answering type stuff. But Allison replaces both of them at Clark.
Not on that level, though.
Any more? All right, well, thanks so much for coming out here